Hello, everyone. Hi, everyone. Welcome to panel number two. So our topic today is what does live mean in the virtual production world? Seeing as we're all separated from each other, how do we bring the electricity of live productions to this virtual world? So I have an amazing panel today. I have Dirk Sanders, I have Nick Rivero, and Troy Fujimura, all of whom are pretty experienced in this whole thing. So I'm just going to hand over to them to do a quick intro of each of them, and then we'll get into it.
So, hey everybody.
Sorry, Nick, you want to go first?
So, hey everybody, I'm Nick Rivero. I'm the co-founder and chief technologist of Atlanta-based Meptic. Troy?
Hi everyone, Troy Fujimura, freelance programmer and lighting and media server based out of Chicago. Dirk?
Hi, yeah, I'm Dirk Sanders. I'm a video director and producer from 1-3 Right Studios here in Los Angeles.
And I'm Ash. I set up Disguise or D3 a long time ago, and now I'm sort of in Spain doing panels like this, and trying to think about the future. So yeah, just to get into the topic a bit more, obviously, since we can't all be together in the same room, we need to start to replicate the key essential elements of live experience when the audience is not in the same space as the performers. And in order to do this, we're going to have to figure out what is the essence of live in some way and start to bring that into the technology that connects us. So, I mean, we're all experiencing this right now. We're all in the audience for this thing. And, what would we actually like to see right here so that we could be aware of each other and the performers could get feedback, the panelists could get feedback for what's going on. So just want to hand over to Nick to start with. What is audience engagement to you? What is the challenge here?
Yeah, so I think, audience engagement is that's like the core piece of the shows, the events, the live. That is it, is to do this, is to have that interactive experience right then and there with a room full of people. And now, obviously, with virtual, that to me is the most lacking piece we have right now, is not being able to be in the same room, not being able to see the people around you's emotion in that interaction. That is lacking. And it's really questioned in this new era, in this new frontier, is what does that even mean? What does audience engagement mean? And I think for us personally, what we've really tried to start doing is thinking about what is the essence of audience engagement, of audience interaction? What is the essence of being there? Like, is it just about sitting in a chair and watching your favorite band on stage? Or is it really even deeper than that? Is it about the emotional connection that's elicited? Is it about the emotional ties of you and your best friend getting to go see a certain theater play? Whatever the things are, I think it's actually a much deeper thing that we have to kind of start to philosophically analyze. Is, do chat windows really fulfill an emotional connection in the future? Does that do it? Is being able to, all four of us sit here and watch the same movie and just have messages, is that a fulfilling experience? I don't know, but I think we have to start analyzing it. And I think what we have to do is really analyze, like, what are the essence of what it means to be in that experience.
So Dirk, you had some interesting things to say about like things like the Oscars and such.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think audience engagement varies depending on the genre or the type of show we're in, but the power of a crowd or the power of an audience is pretty much immeasurable. So, I mean, I got into the industry starting in rock concert touring, and like when the house lights go out, there's the roar of the audience, and that, like, it can give you goosebumps, and that energy feeds back to the performers just as much as it's exciting to be a technician or a designer working on a show to show off this piece of art or performance that you've created. And I think when we get into like broadcast television, it is an interesting scenario. Like we tune into television and watch like how we shoot we take audience shots to show like how people are responding, whether it be like what are they wearing? Like somebody just said something crazy. How did that person react in the audience? Like it helps with the storytelling. And that's really hard to achieve right now in this sort of virtual environment. That is the that is the thing. Like how do we innovate around that and find a way to create that sort of deeper connection?
Troy, you want to jump in too?
Well, I think all of this just really speaks to how much the audience is part of that story, right? It's this communication between what the performer or what the speaker is doing on stage and how the audience is perceiving what they're doing, and how, as audience members, we're together and then sharing that experience together. And it's interesting, from doing a large amount of both corporate events and theater events and concert events, that no matter what type of person is on stage, a trained actor or a trained singer, or a corporate presenter that maybe doesn't have that training, in all of those cases, they sense the audience and how this is an experience, a once-in-a-lifetime experience that we're all sharing together.
So yeah, the other thing that quite interested me is, obviously this is a challenge that people are facing today, and there's a number of platforms out there already doing stuff. Like Facebook Live is out there, Twitch is out there, YouTube's out there. I wonder if you guys could maybe speak about some things you've seen in the way people are currently trying to solve this problem, because that might be a useful jumping off point to think about where we go next. Nick, do you want to go?
Yeah. So I think to hop off of a point you just made, Troy, is I think that like what we're realizing, and maybe starting here, is like we always knew the audience was the essence and the important, but now that we've had an absence of it, we realize how important it really is. Like the feedback, that instantaneous feedback of when a comedian tells their joke and whether it lands, that is something you can only get with those people in a room. And now that comedians can't do that, it's like, oh, right. And so I think that's the big thing that people are kind of rushing to do right now in virtual platforms is it simple things about like, I just blanked out on the one where basically just like all of us watching like a movie together and being able to have a conversation, like we can all sync up and watch the same movie together and have kind of that shared experience. I think that's one of the big pieces right now is how do we further develop the shared experience? And I think, right now, most of everything we've analyzed and seen is it's all very like text or chat based, or it's very video conference based. So it's kind of like these two groups. It's like the ideas of still instant messaging over here, or it's the idea that we're all talking to each other, but there's obviously limitations to both. So I think in the essence, what we've seen is just those kind of limitations, I would say. Dirk?
Yeah, I think one thing about platforms like YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, the one thing I do like about it is I find myself watching things that I might not normally watch. So through COVID, there's been a number of press briefings by various politicians, and it'll come up in the feed like, the governor of New York is live or the president is live. And so you click on it, and it's interesting. I think those manifest the problem of distilling what your engagement is down to a heart, an angry face, a thumbs up, a thumbs down, and then a stream of comments whizzing by at 1,000,000 miles an hour. But you get, this hearts, you get angry faces, both sides, and it varies depending on what, outlet you've got to. So it's taking all this energy and distilling it down into a little icon or, an emoji. And it's like, is that enough, to feel connected?
Yeah, I think that's sort of a common interface that we're seeing a lot, right? Like, I'm super addicted to Questlove's DJ sets on, his YouTube live transmissions. And same thing, you see that scrolling chat, and are we getting something from that, right? People essentially just shouting out things from the crowd. Obviously, that's a huge part of a live concert, but does that translate into a feeling that the performer gets? I think that's sort of the biggest disconnect. What does the performer get from a bunch of hearts floating by?
I do think the comments, I find it helpful when you go back and look at, I was watching the Sony Presser Day about PlayStation 5 with a colleague, and we were chatting about it. And going back through, you can gauge and you can figure out sort of the user interaction, or like if something was exciting about a particular video game trailer, you were getting feedback that those of us that are kind of in the field or thinking about it for a competitive event, could like pull from like what was going successful, what was not, just based on like that information. So that is interesting. Like but it's not the same of being in the room and somebody's favorite character comes on the screen and the crowd or the fans go wild over it, or their cheers. So it's a very different sort of way to extract information from.
Well,
sorry, Karen. Sorry.
Well, and we think about like performances that we've been to, and how, okay, maybe we've rehearsed something, and then when it's in front of an audience, how that changed, right? Changes due to that real-time dialogue that's happening, and doing these things through these, disconnected platforms. How do we create something that will help and encourage the performer to do those adaptations?
Exactly. Now, if we're going to, if one of the things I really hope for all of these conversations is that they sort of lead to something in the end, so that somewhere out there is a person who has the capability of building a system that can do some of these things, and they'll be watching this, and so we're talking about something that can somehow take the video and audio feeds of hundreds of thousands of people and combine them into something that gives the live performer and in fact the rest of the audience some sort of sense of what's going on in the audience. So I wonder, Nick, if you could speak a bit to the experience of being at the show and what you see and what you hear and how that affects both the show and the audience experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's like we said earlier, it's like that's everything. That is why I think all of us got into live events, is that thrill, because you feel the presence when you stand in Dallas Cowboys Stadium and you're doing a concert to 80,000 people. You instantly feel the energy, the momentum, all of those things that are just so irreplaceable. What's something interesting, kind of iterating, Dirk, what you were saying is like, now with digital connection in this, it's you're connected in a very different way. It's like what you were saying is you can go back and watch a press conference and see the audience engagement and reaction at a very specific point in time. Like with a live show, what happens is you go into the green room after and you're like, well, that thing we thought was going to land didn't land, and that other thing the audience thought that's that new song they loved, and you just kind of have this memory of processing that. But now we can actually go back to 5 minutes and 32 seconds and realize that didn't land, which is a very interesting thing to think about, is that we can actually succinctly see the connection of how people are telling us in real time. So it's almost a question to ask of, are we more hyper connected to our audience in some ways now than actually in a live room? Because in a live room, you could have 40,000 people that are into it and 40,000 people that are not into it, but the aggregate is somewhere that it's goodish bad. But here we can actually see 38,000 people liked it, 2,000 people or whatever. Is that actually helping us more in some ways? To kind of ask a little bit different question back is, in this replacing this audience engagement and that momentum, that's the thing we can't, right? So that's what we're saying is like the voices, the screaming, the applauses, the boos, the heckling, you can't replace that, or can you?
Maybe one of the things that one of the examples I thought was interesting was how when you watch a comedy show that's taped in front of a live studio audience, there's a small group of people that's been primed and understand what they're doing as part of that performance. They know they have to react in some way, right? They can't just sit there silently, and that sort of serves as a proxy or a stand-in for the wider audience. So the wider audience feels like they're watching the show. They feel more kind of part of the. So do you Dirk, because you talked about how like the audience at the Oscars is sort of part of the show. Do you think it might be possible that actually some quite small scale stuff could work, if you had the right tech?
Yeah, I think so. I was just also thinking about like we often have casted audiences on big shows to help create, excitement. Like there's a little bit of work that goes on there, and there's a number of corporate events that maybe do the similar thing by bringing in people who are influencers or fans. And I kind of wonder if there's a way that transcends into some of the virtual production as well. Like can you sort of build, through your user base, bring some of that engagement to like get the conversation going? Because there's a little bit of that happens with live television and live events.
Troy?
Well, I think one of the interesting parts, like especially what Dirk is talking about, like those audience shots, right, where it's like, oh, I'm able to see and focus on a small group of people and how they react, right, and maybe that's confirming or validating how I'm reacting to what's happening on stage. But I think the people that are on stage also do that in certain ways, and we've all worked with different performers that connect with the audience in certain ways, right? You're on stage and you look out and you see this vast crowd, but then in performance you see them connecting very personally with a member of the audience over here or a member of the audience over there. So how do we bring that into this virtual world where if you're in a Zoom meeting or you're in a Zoom performance where there's a grid of 100 or 200 people, is there a mechanism that's bringing people in and out of focus so that you can make those individual connections and then go back to the audience and make another connection?
You could do this today. I mean, if you're doing a virtual performance and you want to create better connection, you could just literally set up a bunch of Zoom chats and then invite 200 people and put those monitors on the wall out of shot so that only the talent can see it, right? And that would actually improve the performance because you get some feedback even if the audience doesn't see that, right? So I guess future, we're talking about how do you make that accessible to the audience as well? Like how do you bring that experience to the audience?
Yeah. I mean, in the future virtual world, right, during the performance, you could go into all of those modes, right, where it's like, oh, in this number, I'm performing for a huge crowd and the audience is experiencing that they're part of a huge crowd. And then in the next number, maybe it feels like it's just you and the performer one-on-one in their living room. Yeah. What is that future like?
Right now with a lot of the live mediums, like the burden to create like the energy is really on the presenter. Like there's not, it's very one-sided right now from just a very like a kind of an audible sort of feel like it. So that's I think one of the biggest challenges in it is like I'm participating in a webinar class right now as an attendee, and people are typing their questions in. And it will actually like disrupt the flow of the instructor who will like deviate to be like, hey, great point, but it's this, rather than it being like, I'm giving this speech in this class, it ebbs and flows from where that feedback from the audience comes in. And it's a little, it's also a little awkward to be on a Zoom with 50 other people where you're like have to be engaged. Like that's not actually how it usually goes in an audience. Like you're not front and center on somebody else's screen either. You're amongst a group, you kind of blend into the crowd.
And there's also that social dimension to the experience. Like if you go to a gig with your friends, you can talk to your friends without that interrupting the performance in general. You can talk about what you're seeing. You can tune out if you want to, if you're not into it for whatever reason, And so I think it's probably whatever technology people build to do this is probably needs to take that into account. So, maybe when you're watching the show of the future, you have a central window with the main performance, and then, a surround of the wider audience, the wider studio audience, where you don't really hear them, you just hear a kind of filtered thing. And then maybe 5 or 6 of your friends at the bottom, and you can actually hear them quite clearly, or tune them out if you want to. I mean, that's, I think, how that experience looks and feels in the future, right?
What I was going to say is, I think think crazy into the future is I really 50 years, it's like augmented reality and the concepts of AR will be so commonplace. We already see people like, going back to Google Glass, trying to develop that blurring of reality, of physical and virtual. And I think that when that becomes even more commonplace, who's to say that you don't just put on a pair of glasses living next, in a virtual environment at that point. And also, who's to say that there's not new forms of interaction? Like, think about, is it like wearable tech, like a watch that has haptic feedback that a performer can feel, like the number of likes? Maybe it's more, again, going back to like, is it the emotional tie? What are the things that actually tie us to it? But I think that is, especially I think as AR becomes more commonplace, which it is and will be, in my opinion, is that might be the blurring of the lines. The new Netflix is you just put on these glasses and the four of us are at Staples Center in LA watching some show.
Yeah. In fact, now we have about 10 minutes to go. I thought it would be a good time to turn our attention from, all this video stuff is sort of the next year or so, isn't it, really? People are going to start building this stuff and we're going to start using it. But then, the deeper future, as you said, is AR and virtual concerts. Now, obviously, there's been some really interesting recent examples, such as the Travis Scott show that everyone talks about, and there's Wave XR and things like that. My personal view is that we're a little bit away from that stuff becoming mainstream, but I think it's really important to think about that and what that looks like. So, wondered what thoughts you guys had on that. Maybe Dirk, you want to go about?
Yeah. I think you bring up a really interesting one. The Fortnite concerts. One of them, like, the Marshmello one was last year. It's been so it was even sort of pre-COVID and some of what we've been experiencing. It had 10 million live viewers. Like, I mean, that's comparable, if not better, than some television shows. Like The Voice had about 7 million last week. You get into things like Grammys and Oscars, which are in the 20 millions of people. So Marshmello had 10 million. Travis had Travis Scott's thing, which was recent, was like 12 million people live. And this came up in conversation. Drew Finley and I were talking about this. People could come in and bounce around and choose their own adventure through that experience. So while the performance was sort of banked, there was a finite time you had to tune in, but you could choose how you wanted to go about finding your way through the performance. Do you want to be up on stage? Do you want to go bouncing off, in some other part of the Fortnite sort of environment? So really interesting from a new kind of genre of experience, using like video game as the medium.
And Troy, do you think do you feel that this technology is something that's going to be with us very soon, or is it something that you think is maybe further off being mainstream? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it's probably a bit off, because some of what I think the future holds for this is hardware based, right? Many people will need to have some type of AR or VR kit. And when we think about this, where we are now, right, we're all experiencing this through the window of a laptop or of a screen, right? That's only a small part of our viewport. So it's easy to be disconnected or distracted. Where if we think about the live event, we're immersed in that event. And now when we think about that event in VR, it's the same thing. When I'm in VR in the event, I can't help but be engaged because I'm immersed in that, right? And I think that will be part of the audience engagement of the future, right? When you're immersed in the space that is the event, that directs all of your attention to the event, as opposed to how we're sort of experiencing this now as a small window in our world.
Nick?
And I think the one thing I would say about the future is, like, to the point of the Fortnite concerts, is part of looking to the future is letting go of the past in some ways, of like, what we are talking about is how we currently connect. But maybe in 50 years, the idea, like throwing out a blue sky future, is what if we throw out the idea of how concerts work altogether, that people sit in an audience, and that's kind of what Fortnite is doing, right? Is you're saying 10 million people can run around and watch this concert in a completely dynamic new way. That's kind of like, I think what part of the future of these experiences is, how much do we hold on to what we know of how the environments work versus how much do we go, well, what could it be? What could it be like? Could you run around and watch 100-foot tall Travis Scott? Is that engaging? And I think those are the questions that are getting asked. And what's been really fascinating about this year is the rate of innovation is just like exponential right now. It's because this is our only medium is to work this way. We're now innovating at a pace, and I think that is just incredible to me. Is that we've always known that, like what you're saying, Troy, is like we're limited by the hardware, by our laptop, by our screen, but now we all realize it because it's all our everyday reality. We realize that we can only talk through our phone and our computer. And I think that's the thing, is we need to hold on to the essence of what makes these experiences worthwhile, but we need to look to the future of what's next, how, the what else of what's ahead.
Yeah, and I think we're going to be, like, what's happening now and the way audiences are engaging with art and performance now, I don't think is going to go away. I think what'll happen is when we're able to get back into the real space, the audience is going to be in multiple spaces. It'll be with us live in the arena and in the stage, but it may also be happening in parallel with the people viewing at home. So how do we make those audience engagements unique and not feel that, oh, I'm watching this concert from home, my experience is diminished?
Exactly. I mean, you're reminding me of one of my formative experiences working on U2, standing in front of house, and there was a platform in front of us where all the celeb guests were, and I remember standing like 6 feet away from Brad Pitt as Bono comes on stage, going, "This is really amazing." I think this idea that you could have an experience where you're seeing a very intimate show with like 200 people watching your favorite band in a small room, and everybody else is either your friends or somebody famous that's also watching that show. And everybody has that experience, but times a million at the same time. I mean, those are the sorts of things that you could imagine happening in the future, because you're not constrained by physics in the same way. I'm conscious of time. We have about 2 minutes left. Just wondered, I think let's just say we were doing this the next time we do this, right? I just want to get some thoughts of like what you having had this experience of being on a panel with a silent audience out there. What would you like to see as a first step for the next time we do this? Nick, you want to go?
Yeah, I think really simply is what digital allows us to do is have bidirectional communication. So I think being able to have an audience that's actually directionally engaging with you, I think is interesting to me. Dirk?
Yeah, I look forward to us being inside a virtual world where we can put on our glasses and goggles or whatnot and go for it. We can have a virtual audience look out and see it.
Troy?
Yeah, I agree completely. Some way that when these presentations are happening, that you're able to make specific individual connections with people that are viewing or attending these things. I think that's going to be a big part of it.
So maybe we should, we tried spatial.io a little while ago and found it really enjoyable. So maybe we should try something like that as a little experiment for the next time we do this. So I think we're out of time now. We're exactly out of time. So thank you so much to the panel. It's been really fun. I hope this is the start of a conversation that leads on to more. I would invite everyone who's interested in discussing this to come to the social area. There's going to be a break for 15 minutes, and then we'll have the next panel. So about I'm not sure what the EDT is, but because it's 6 p.m. for me right now. But 15 minutes from now, we're going to be back for the next panel. Thanks a lot.